Passers-by thought he was just another street performer trying to make ends meet, strumming his guitar and singing for spare change. But when gunmen attacked the Pedestrian Mall, the weapon hidden in his guitar case wasn't the only skill he'd kept secret from his CIA days. Welcome to True Human Tales. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden identities and street-level heroism, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. The Riverside Pedestrian Mall stretched 4 blocks through the heart of downtown Burlington, a tree-lined corridor where cars gave way to foot traffic, and the sounds of commerce mixed with the melodies of street performers. The mall had been the city's pride for over 2 decades, transforming what had once been a struggling downtown into a vibrant hub where families shopped, students studied in outdoor cafes, and tourists discovered the authentic charm of Vermont's cultural center. At the corner of Church and Main, beneath the shade of an old maple tree that had somehow survived urban development, Eddie Castellano had claimed his spot 12 years ago. Every day except Sunday, from noon until sunset, Eddie would unfold his worn camping chair, open his battered guitar case, and transform his small corner of the world into something resembling magic. At 71, Eddie moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints had accumulated decades of stories, but his fingers retained the nimble precision that allowed him to coax melodies from his 30-year-old Martin acoustic guitar. The instrument bore the scars of its travels, scratches from countless performances, worn spots where Eddie's picking hand had rubbed the finish smooth, and a small crack near the sound hole that gave his music a distinctive woody resonance. Eddie's repertoire was as eclectic as the crowd that gathered around him. He could shift seamlessly from Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind to Beethoven's Ode to Joy, from traditional folk ballads to contemporary hits that teenagers requested with shy smiles and crumpled dollar bills. His voice, weathered but warm, had the quality of a favorite uncle telling stories on a front porch, comfortable, familiar, and somehow healing. The regulars knew Eddie's schedule and preferences. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the used bookstore across the street, always requested bridge over troubled water during her lunch break. The coffee shop employees would send out free drinks when business was slow, and Eddie's music helped draw customers. College students from the nearby university would gather during finals week, finding comfort in his gentle renditions of classic rock that reminded them of home. Children were drawn to Eddie like he was a musical Pied Piper. He knew dozens of simple songs that got them clapping and singing along, and he had an inexhaustible supply of stickers featuring cartoon guitars that he handed out to young fans. Parents appreciated how Eddie always kept his performances family-friendly, switching to quieter melodies when babies needed calming and avoiding songs with questionable lyrics when school groups passed by. What made Eddie special wasn't just his musical talent, though that was considerable, but his genuine warmth and ability to make everyone feel like they had found a friend. He remembered faces, asked about people's jobs and families, and somehow always knew exactly what song someone needed to hear. Business people stressed about presentations would find themselves humming along to Here Comes the Sun. Elderly couples would pause to hold hands during The Way You Look Tonight. Teenagers dealing with heartbreak discovered that Eddie had an uncanny ability to select songs that spoke directly to their souls. The guitar case that sat open at Eddie's feet told its own story. The interior was lined with faded red velvet that had once been luxurious, but now showed the wear of thousands of coins and bills dropped by grateful listeners. A handwritten sign read, "Songs for Smiles, Tips Appreciated," and Eddie genuinely seemed more interested in the smiles than the money, though the modest donations kept him in coffee and helped pay for new guitar strings when needed. Regular customers had developed their own relationships with Eddie's music. The postal workers from the nearby sorting facility would time their lunch breaks to catch his 1 p.m. set. Local business owners would step outside when they heard certain melodies drifting through their shop doors. Even the street vendors who worked nearby had learned to appreciate how Eddie's music helped create the kind of atmosphere that made people want to linger, browse, and ultimately buy. What passers-by couldn't see was the case's carefully concealed false bottom, accessible through a hidden mechanism that required knowledge of exactly which corner to press while lifting a specific section of the velvet lining. What they also couldn't know was that the gentle street musician, who brought such joy to their daily routines, had once brought something very different to people in places where American interests required a more direct approach. Eddie Castellano had served with the Central Intelligence Agency for 26 years, from 1976 to 2002, specializing in what agency documents euphemistically called cultural infiltration and human intelligence gathering. In plain language, Eddie had been a spy who used music as cover for operations in places where traditional diplomatic channels couldn't reach. His guitar had been his constant companion through decades of deep cover assignments in Eastern Europe, South America, and the Middle East. He'd played in coffeehouses in Prague while monitoring Soviet intelligence activities, performed in cantinas in Colombia while tracking narcotics trafficking networks, and strummed folk songs in Afghan tea houses while gathering intelligence on insurgent movements. His musical talent wasn't just authentic, it was essential to his survival and effectiveness as an operative. Eddie's transition to retirement had been carefully managed by agency handlers who understood that men with his skill set and knowledge base couldn't simply disappear into suburban anonymity. The street musician persona wasn't just a cover story for retirement, it was therapy, a way for Eddie to use his musical abilities for healing rather than intelligence gathering, to bring joy instead of extracting secrets. The Burlington location had been chosen strategically after months of evaluation. The city was large enough to provide anonymity, but small enough that Eddie could know his community intimately. The Pedestrian Mall offered the perfect environment for his new mission, using music to brighten lives rather than extract information, building relationships based on genuine affection rather than operational necessity. The agency had even provided a modest pension supplement that allowed Eddie to pursue his music without financial pressure, ensuring his retirement remained secure and his cover story sustainable. For 12 years, Eddie had found peace in his daily routine. The weight of classified knowledge had gradually lightened as he focused on remembering song lyrics instead of surveillance protocols, on reading the emotional needs of his audience instead of identifying potential intelligence assets. His greatest satisfaction came from seeing regular listeners smile when they recognized the opening chords of a favorite song, or watching a stressed parent relax as his music calmed a fussy toddler. March 22nd started like any typical Tuesday during the early spring season. The maple tree above Eddie's corner was beginning to show the first hints of budding, and the Pedestrian Mall was busy with lunchtime shoppers and tourists, taking advantage of the warming weather. Eddie had arrived at his usual time, set up his chair and music stand, and tuned his guitar with the ritualistic care of someone who understood that details mattered. By 1:30 p.m., he'd worked through his standard afternoon repertoire, light jazz for the lunch crowd, a few classic rock requests from construction workers on break, and Puff the Magic Dragon for a group of preschoolers whose teacher had stopped to let them listen. The atmosphere was exactly what Eddie had come to love about his corner, relaxed, friendly, and filled with the kind of small human connections that made urban life bearable. That's when Eddie noticed them. 3 men moving through the crowd with the purposeful navigation that Eddie's trained eye recognized as operational rather than recreational. They wore casual clothing that was slightly too new, carried themselves with the alert posture of people conducting surveillance rather than shopping, and moved in a loose formation that kept them in visual contact while appearing unconnected. Eddie's operational radar, dormant for years but never fully disabled, began processing threat indicators with automatic precision. The men's attention patterns were wrong. They were scanning faces and building layouts rather than store windows and merchandise. Their clothing concealed bulk in places consistent with concealed weapons. Most tellingly, they were communicating through subtle hand signals that civilians wouldn't recognize, but that Eddie's training had taught him to read like a foreign language. Eddie continued playing Scarborough Fair without missing a chord, but his awareness shifted into the heightened state that had once kept him alive in places where a moment's inattention could prove fatal. He mentally mapped the Pedestrian Mall's layout, noting exit routes, potential cover, and civilian concentration areas. His fingers found the familiar progression of the folk ballad, while his mind calculated sight lines and response options. The men positioned themselves strategically around the central plaza area where the Pedestrian Mall widened into a space filled with outdoor cafe seating and a small fountain that attracted children. Their placement suggested they were preparing to control the space, to trap rather than simply observe the crowd that had gathered for lunch and shopping. Eddie's training had taught him to recognize the signs of an impending operation, and everything about these three men suggested that something was about to happen. Their body language had shifted from surveillance to preparation, their positioning from observation to tactical advantage. One checked his watch with the focused attention of someone operating on a timeline. Another adjusted something under his jacket with the careful movement of someone ensuring weapon accessibility. At 1:47 p.m., Eddie's suspicions were confirmed when the lead man produced what appeared to be a radio and spoke into it with the clipped efficiency of someone coordinating with additional personnel. Within seconds, two more men emerged from the covered walkway that led to the indoor mall section, their movement pattern identical to the first three, purposeful, coordinated, and wrong for the peaceful shopping environment. Eddie realized he was witnessing the preparation for what intelligence professionals called a soft target operation, an attack designed to maximize civilian casualties and psychological impact in a location where people felt safe and security was minimal. The Pedestrian Mall was perfect for such an operation, crowded, confined, with limited escape routes and no significant security presence. As Eddie watched, the first man reached into his jacket and produced a compact submachine gun with the fluid motion of someone who'd practiced the draw countless times. That's when Eddie stopped being a street musician and became an operative again. Eddie's hand moved to his guitar case with the same casual motion he'd used thousands of times to retrieve sheet music or spare picks, but this time his fingers found the hidden mechanism that opened the false bottom compartment. Inside, carefully maintained and always loaded, was an Sig Sauer P226 that had been his sidearm throughout his CIA career. The weapon came into his hand with the familiar weight of an old friend, safety disengaged with muscle memory that transcended the years since he'd last needed it. The gunman had expected to control a crowd of defenseless civilians, shoppers, and tourists who would panic and provide easy targets for their weapons. What they hadn't expected was return fire from a position they couldn't have anticipated, delivered with accuracy that spoke of decades of training and operational experience. Eddie's first shot took the lead gunman as he raised his weapon toward the crowd gathered around the fountain. The sound of gunfire in the previously peaceful mall created instant chaos, but Eddie's next two shots followed with mechanical precision, each one placed with the accuracy that had once made him invaluable to operations where civilian casualties were unacceptable. The remaining gunmen attempted to locate the source of return fire, but Eddie had chosen his position well. The maple tree provided concealment, the angle of his chair offered cover from multiple directions, and his years of performing from the same spot had given him intimate knowledge of every sight line and firing position in the immediate area. Within 90 seconds, the threat was neutralized, the mall was secure, and the civilians who had come for shopping and lunch were safe from an attack they'd never seen coming. Eddie holstered his weapon, returned it to the guitar case's hidden compartment, and immediately began using his voice, the same voice that had entertained children and comforted stressed adults, to calm the panicked crowd and direct them toward safety. When law enforcement arrived, they found Eddie still in his chair, his guitar in his hands, playing Amazing Grace with the gentle professionalism that had made him a neighborhood fixture. The song provided comfort to shaken civilians and helped restore calm to a scene that could have become much worse. The investigation revealed the full scope of the planned attack, a coordinated assault designed to maximize casualties in a location where families felt safe to gather. The attackers had researched the mall's layout, crowd patterns, and security protocols with the thoroughness of professionals planning a military operation. Intelligence analysis later revealed connections to international terrorist networks, suggesting the Burlington attack was intended as a test run for larger operations in major metropolitan areas. What they hadn't researched was Eddie Castellano. The FBI agents who interviewed Eddie were initially skeptical of his claims about his background, until agency liaisons confirmed his identity and service record. 26 years of classified operations, commendations for actions that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, and skills that had been considered too valuable to waste on conventional assignments. The debriefing sessions revealed that Eddie's musical performances it actually provided valuable intelligence about potential security vulnerabilities in public spaces, information he had quietly shared with local law enforcement through unofficial channels. The media wanted to interview him about his transition from spy to street performer, about the psychology of retirement from intelligence work, about the moment when his two worlds had collided. Eddie politely declined all interview requests, preferring to let his music speak for itself. The Burlington Police Department offered to provide security for his daily performances, concerned that his identity exposure might make him a target. Eddie thanked them but declined, explaining that he'd spent 26 years learning how to take care of himself and wasn't about to stop now. 3 days later, Eddie returned to his corner beneath the maple tree, set up his chair and music stand, and began playing "Here Comes the Sun" for the lunch crowd. The same regulars gathered around him: Mrs. Patterson from the bookstore, college students with their textbooks, families with children who wanted to hear their favorite songs. The only change was a small increase in the donations left in his guitar case, and the way people lingered a little longer during his performances, as if they'd gained a new appreciation for the man who'd been making their days brighter all along. Because some men serve their country in ways that can never be fully acknowledged, and when their official service ends, they find new ways to serve their community. Eddie had spent 26 years using music to gather intelligence, and 20 years using music to spread joy. Both were forms of service, both required skill and dedication, and both made the world a little safer for the people who mattered. The difference was that now everyone got to hear the music. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Eddie? Someone who seemed like just a friendly street musician until the moment they revealed the depths of their expertise and dedication? Someone whose daily presence made you feel safer without knowing why? Tell me in the comments where are you watching from today and share their story with us. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. We publish human stories that matter every single week. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the person playing music on your corner knows more about protection than you could ever imagine.